Hello and welcome. My name is Elisa Voshel and I am Executive Director at Minnesota Center for Book Arts. MCBA is a community-based nonprofit organization dedicated to igniting creativity and community through the book arts. Through our artist programs, studios, workshops, and educational opportunities for people of all ages, we preserve the tools and traditions of book arts, support artists using these media in compelling ways, and connect contemporary audiences to the arts of the book. We believe in the limitless creative possibilities of this dynamic and evolving art form, and envision a world in which the creative expression through the book arts is accessible to all. I'd like to acknowledge our MCBA Prize sponsors and supporters, without whom this celebration of artist books would not be possible. A huge thank you to sponsors Ronnie and Roger Brooks, Raphael Coburn, Lyndall and Blaine King, Sean McCain, Diane Merrifield, Casey Foley and John Noisy, Hema Vishwanathan, and Lori Zenner for supporting this initiative. This activity is also made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board operating support grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, as well as individual supporters of MCBA. If you enjoy the event tonight and want to make more of our programming possible, please consider becoming a member or making a donation to support our center. Next, I wanted to issue a big thank you to all of you who donated $20 or more to the MCBA Prize when you registered. Your prize party kits went out in the mail last week, and we're crossing our fingers that they arrived in time for tonight's event. We had a little snag with what the USPS considers machinable, so we needed to repackage a few of them and send them out again. The good news is you're still in the running for a $50 workshop gift certificate, which can be used towards a virtual or in-person workshop. And we put names through a randomizer earlier, and we can reveal that the winner is Andrea Olinger of Louisville, Kentucky. Andrea, you can look for that gift certificate in your inbox in the next few days. And finally, I wanted to thank our staff for making this possible. This is an all hands on deck endeavor, the MCBA Prize. And I wanted to thank all of you for being here this evening, or whatever time of day it is in your time zone, as we explore innovative and thought-provoking artist books from around the world, celebrate this year's 5 finalists, and reveal the 2022 MCBA Prize winner. This is our 7th iteration of this biennial international award, which we launched in 2009, recognizing excellence in new work from across the dynamic spectrum of book art. The finalists receive a $500 award, and the winner receives a $2,000 award in recognition of their contributions to advancing the book arts field. Later in the program, we will be showing a video of the 5 finalists talking about their work. We'll also be using the chat feature for you to ask questions during the Q&A, when we'll invite all of the finalists to join us. At the end, we'll have a chance for everyone to turn their cameras on for a toast. If you're local to the Twin Cities, we also invite you to come see the MCBA Prize exhibition in person. The exhibition features 19 of the semifinalists and 5 finalists as well, and it's on view in our main gallery through October 15th. And we'll be hosting a closing reception on Friday, October 14th from 6 to 8 p.m. And I hope to see you all there. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce this year's MCBA Prize juror, Megan Liberty. Megan is an arts writer, editor, and archivist based in Brooklyn, who writes about artist books, ephemera, archives, and other multidisciplinary meetings of text and image. She is the arts book section editor of Brooklyn Rail and co-founder of the Book Art Review. Her writing appears regularly on Hyperallergic and in Art Review, and has also been published in Art Forum, Art in America, Frieze, the New York Review of Books Daily, LA Review of Books, White Review, Art in Print, and elsewhere. Megan holds an MA in Art History from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Megan is currently curating a historical exhibition of artist books, craft and contemporary art, reshaping the legacy of artist books, which will be accompanied by a fully illustrated scholarly catalog. The exhibition will open at Center for Book Arts in New York, before traveling to the San Francisco Center for the book and here to Minnesota Center for Book Arts, where it will be on view next year, August through October. Please join me in welcoming Megan.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that really nice introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to jury this prize this year. It was such a pleasure to see so many works by so many wonderful artists from across the country and the world, and see all the different interpretations of the book and of artist books. The finalists stood out to me because of their use of materials and how these materials really aligned with the conceptual meaning of their work. So now we would like to share a brief video, including images from the MCBA Prize semifinalists and videos of the 5 finalists speaking about their artwork. Savannah Bustio, Stephen Daber, Aaron Moore, Keri Miki-Lani Schroeder, and Jacob Wan. MCBA Board Chair Corey Zanin will reveal the MCBA Prize winner shortly after the video.
This installation of books and cue cards is a game. Guests are invited via the covers of the 2 books to do a reading out loud. One book prompts the viewer with a set of directions in English, and the other in Spanish, with the promise that if a guest chooses to read the Spanish tongue twister or trabalenguas out loud, they can then tear out and keep a page from the other book. This trabalenguas is used to teach the speaker how to create the trilled R in Spanish. The more often one repeats the trabalenguas, the stronger the trilled R will become, as your tongue slowly adjusts to the correct placement in the mouth. Yet, guests have a choice. When they open one of the books, they will find the trabalenguas in the other language, and must decide whether to read it out loud. Over time, the choices audiences make will be displayed in what pages remain of the 2 books, themselves sisters. Both are created from a single recycled car repair manual, a reminder that the history of language cannot be divorced from the physical material of the world, nor the mechanical ways we try to train our mouths to accommodate different linguistic paradigms. This piece is a demonstration of the way language lives and breathes between us all, its innate performativity, the privileges that surround us and grant some of us accessibility to certain ways of speaking and understanding, and the way its repeated use or disuse shapes our histories.
Sometime in the mid-1990s, I acquired a 19th century ledger with handwritten medical notes. In these notes were wonderful detailed explanations of the human body with recipes for medical cures. I thought at the time I could do something with this book. In June 2014, my brother called me to let me know he had colon cancer. I wanted to come down immediately. He said, "No, I've got friends. I'll call you." We'd kept our own company for the better part of 20 years. He hadn't seen my daughter grow up, and we really didn't talk after our parents died. In August, when I saw him, I was looking for a 300-pound obese man, and here was a frail 180-pound brother. We had a year to reconcile, and during that process, I realized the purpose for the ledger. I told him after he passed, I would make something of our lives together. We should turn the pages early on. The verso is a magnified image to the location of his cancer that fades further into the book. Brother's Keeper is a layered personal information from his birth book written in our mother's hands, copious medical notations from 3 pounds of medical documents and family photographs. In 1990, I created a series of 19th century medical illustrations that found their home in this project. Interspersed throughout are images of scouting. Scouting was an important part of our lives. Weekend camping, hiking for days on the Appalachian Trail. We were both Eagle Scouts. And once we got into our 20s, we went our own ways. I was the artist. He was in the Navy. He worked blue-collar jobs. We were brothers with little in common except the past. The last pages are painted white and contain his fragmented skeleton. Making this book and the accompanying prints wasn't a fun project, and yet absolutely fascinating. I'd had about 3 hours of sleep after his passing when his housemate called to say that Greg's toilet was gushing. And yes, the water was everywhere in the apartment, the bedroom, the hallway, the living room. I saw it as Greg's last laugh.
Personal is an intimate dive into the world of queer personal ads. This flag book opens to display 24 personal ads sourced from various gay, lesbian, and transgender publications, ranging from the early 70s to mid-90s. Similar to the layouts of its source material, the ads in Personal are stacked in narrow rows and columns and printed monochromatically on a risograph, a close cousin of the mimeograph used by many of the magazines. The dimensionality provided by the flag book structure encourages the reader to shift and fold the book to discover each ad. Personal was curated to showcase the broad variety of purposes that personal ads served for queer communities. There is no true organization to the ads. Pleas for romantic partners and messages to dear friends are intermixed with those looking for quick hookups or players for a softball team. However, in every case, there is a sense that the writer was searching for a connection in a society that depended on their isolation. This search for connection is something that transcends the barriers of any decade or sub-community, proving the relevance of these ads today. Personal uses archived material as a bridge to our queer elders, allowing us to see ourselves in their humor, love, desires, and perseverance.
If you need anything, please let me know, is a phrase typically extended to people experiencing trauma. The irony being that after enduring a sudden traumatic event, we are often unable to pinpoint our specific needs. After an unexpected event left me feeling disconnected, I found myself lost in a sense of yearning, but with no clear idea of what could help. Like many people, I have a habit of saving random objects just in case I might need them someday. My goal was to create a third aid kit, capable of holding the memories and essence of these items that make them feel so sentimental and irreplaceable. Something that could be used to help navigate those moments in life that have a distinct before and after, to soothe the areas that physical and mental remedies cannot reach. The compartmented box is inspired by antique survival kits, with industrial-looking snaps holding the trays together. The selected items include bone and shell beads from my great-auntie's necklace, remnants from past projects such as feathers and handmade crystals, scraps of cloth from my grandmother's sewing kit, a wasp nest abandoned after a bad storm. The two trays swivel outward to reveal a discrete instruction booklet containing a diagram, descriptions, and origins for each item. The book and all of the objects are labeled with the same repeated phrase, gold foil stamped onto washi, if you need anything.
Many people taking a sick break is more like looking for a space to be away. They think about the things they trouble, love, or miss. When the time is up, they put the sick down, twist it, and kill it. The leftover cigarette butts look like a dead dream or dead body and contains a story and a physical evidence of the identity. It is an internal conversation within the self, and the sick buzz becomes a punctuation, a period. Cigarettes is a series of conceptual books made of handmade paper of cigarettes with the letters stamped sick buzz as pages. Growing up as a boy, I often been asked to be the man that society expects me to be. Be strong, be tough. The real man does not cry. As a man, the emotions are often hidden inside and shared with the self. The text of Daydreamer shows the internal battle between the ideal and the reality. An empty sick box that is stitched with golden threads without sick butts. Behind the cover, there is no pages. The pages are the sicks that are made into the box. The pages stays in the past, and what has left is what exists. It is the reality, it is the present. Outside of the cover, it is what we show. Behind the cover, it is what we hide. I'm a romanticist. Ideal motivates me to continue, to move on.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Corey Zanin, and I am the MCBA board chair. I'm honored to be a part of tonight's celebration, and I am just having watched that video in awe of each of the finalists being considered for tonight's prize. So with no further ado, I am delighted to announce this year's prize winner, and the prize goes to Keri Miki-Lani Schroeder, If You Need Anything. Congratulations, Keri. Let me hand you, put it on your show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Corey and Annika and Elisa and everyone at MCBA for this event and prize and this teleporting envelope. And I know it sounds like such a cliche to say that this prize has been a dream of mine for a really long time, but it really has, because I've been consistently enamored and impressed by the caliber of artists that it's represented over the years, and including this year's semifinalists and finalists. And I'm so stoked and excited and honored to be here. And I, especially for this particular book, which came out of a pretty dark place, it's been really meaningful and therapeutic to see it transformed into something positive. And I'm excited to talk more about it with Megan, and thank you.
Congratulations, Keri. I'm so excited to get to speak with you today about this book. I really enjoyed looking at all the works that were submitted, as I said, but yours, I was really drawn to this work primarily because it embraced a kind of storytelling that everyday people engage in, a story told through the memories that objects hold. So I think it's really relatable to artists and to everyday people who hold objects and keep things, but we can't really say exactly why we hold on to them. The title also really resonated with me, and the notion that we often cannot verbalize what we need when we are in times of crisis. And so I've prepared a few topics around this work for us to talk about today. But as we are talking, I encourage the audience to drop their questions and comments in the chat, because after our conversation, it'll be opened up to a larger Q&A with the other finalists as well. So please have a conversation in the chat and we'll get back to you guys. So before we talk about the specific materials that are inside this kit, I'm really interested to know about the format of the box. Looking through in preparation for this conversation, I saw that many of your works have different components, unfolding parts and hidden parts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of compartments and discovery, visibility and invisibility in your works.
I think just the way I process information, the idea of like opening things and this hands-on approach to it tells part of the story itself. I think even as a kid, I was much more drawn to things like pop-up books, or like those, especially the pop-up books that became like little houses, or which were just essentially doll houses. But I think there was much more room for interpretation, and there was also you felt like you had a direct effect on the story, and that it felt more personal to me rather than being led by the hand from beginning to end of the book. I can access this in many different ways, and so I feel like as a reader, I'm part of the process by using these movable components or hidden objects. And
yeah, and it's almost like there's two levels of reading involved in this project, because when you first open it up, before you know to pull out those two side compartments, you are just confronted with this layer of objects. So it's almost requiring the reader to discover the hidden sort of guide to them in this other layer beneath the objects, which I thought was quite interesting. And in this video, you mentioned that one of the reference points for this box structure was an antique survival kit. Where did you encounter this structure before? Did you see similar boxes or specifically antique survival kits in your research?
I was doing a project that is still kind of on the back burner about fallout shelters. And so I'm from Las Vegas, and the Atomic Bomb Testing Museum is there. And they have a lot of examples of different survival kits and all from that era of bomb shelters. And there was something really striking about it, because I'm not entirely sure how much of that is helpful, if there is atomic bomb, but there's a comfort there anyway.
You mentioned a lot of the objects in the box were from your grandmother, and one of the reference points that the box sort of gave to me is this idea of like a jewelry box or a child's keepsake box that opens up, and sometimes a ballerina or another figure would appear almost like a music box, and a keepsake box like that. I wonder, were you inspired at all by your grandmother's own jewelry boxes or items like that in her home?
I think definitely jewelry boxes, and even, there's some pretty inventive makeup boxes too, where they have the swivel compartments. But I did, I think it was just I designed the box kind of just combining all these different elements themselves. But a lot of the objects did come from my great aunts and my grandmother as well, because they were items I've just had for forever. And they're meaningful, and I wanted to use them in a way that I guess somebody could use them. Maybe I could still capture that essence that it carries.
Yeah, so digging in now to some of the specific objects in the box, I was really struck by the variety in terms of the blend of personal and natural, like found like bird feathers versus personal mementos. And I wonder what connection you made between those, exploring in the natural world and then your own personal histories.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think when I was sort of curating these objects, I was just looking through items that I felt a strong connection to, that I've never really been able to put into words properly, but also didn't necessarily have a practical use for me. Some of the items, like the feather, and there's some little purple crystals in there, those were from other projects I've done that I just didn't know what to do with them anymore. But I don't want to, I feel like a more responsible person would save them for, I don't know, archives or something, but I just, reduce, reuse, recycle to other work.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned archives, because that's something else. There was sort of a tension I felt between the idea of the collector, because you mentioned having kept these objects for so long, but you didn't really know why. But then the idea of putting them in this book, you're kind of reversing that. You're giving them away in the opposite of archiving. You're sharing them, and you're assuming or allowing for the opportunity that these objects can hold meaning for a reader or another user.
I think it reached a point, especially when I was sort of processing just certain things that were happening, that, where am I going with this? I could just have the objects, I guess, die with me, but that seems strange and selfish, and nothing was really coming of that. And so I did redistribute them in an edition. But yeah, for exactly that reason, that to hope that it is as meaningful to someone else. And I think it is preserving them in a way that I just as an individual person probably couldn't. So now they're being sent elsewhere to, people and collections that I know that they'll last longer than they probably would in my
different lives. Yeah. So do you consider yourself a collector?
Oh yes. Yeah.
So how did you make this final selection then? I think it's just 8 objects that are in this box. How did you narrow that down to those 8? Were they always present in your life as talismans almost, or were they part of a larger collection and you decided, okay, these are the ones that belong in this box?
I think they have taken on a very talisman feeling to them. And also I didn't want to select things that were maybe too personal that other people maybe couldn't relate to, or things that were like inside jokes or things that only I would understand. So I wanted to pick things that maybe had a more universal connection to them. I don't, like, you can immediately recognize a feather, you can immediately recognize like a button in a little box, or beetle wings. Like, these are things that we've all come across and maybe just didn't pay attention to. But I think that you can also, I do think everything in the box is aesthetically pleasing as well. And so people can spend more time with it, even though they are, I mean, they're common objects for the most part. I think they're often overlooked. It's really just my personal connection to them that gives them meaning, at least to me.
I think it's so interesting that you say they're common objects, because I found a lot of them to be quite surprising. Perhaps the way you describe it is maybe we overlook them, you know, especially the bird feather to me was really striking. I know you work with that kind of material in other works, but it really surprised me. Birds are so common, but yet it takes on such a different meaning when it's an isolated feather, and it becomes fragile and delicate, and like we've said, like a talisman in a way. And getting back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this, the box, the way it unfolds itself, you're confronted with the objects first without the stories that are in the booklet. So on the one hand, we first have our own associations with these objects before we then encounter your associations. And in that booklet, the actual book that's underneath and has a little bit more of the research and narrative behind that. You mentioned, I was reading your statements about this on your website in preparation for this. You mentioned that it's sort of personal stories, but also historical significance of these objects. And I wondered if there were one or two in particular you wanted to share with the larger audience, any of the stories you wanted to share about one or two of the objects?
Sure, absolutely. I have the book here. I mean, I guess when I was writing the stories, I think writing about each of the objects was the most difficult part, more so than selecting them or even designing the box itself. It was more about being able to write down the right information that people would respond to. Again, without making it too personal, but not so mysterious or, you know, purposefully.
I can imagine that would be challenging, especially because, as the title of the book suggests, it's really about what you can't put into words and the meanings that objects hold that can't quite be verbalized or explained. So then to write it down, it makes sense that that would be a very challenging part of this bookmaking project.
One of the items here, this little vial, I don't know how well you can see it, but it's a little vial of beads from my Auntie Kyoko's necklace, and it's like glass and shell and what looks like bone and shell. And I think writing about that was difficult because I don't really know much about the necklace itself, but also who would want to read about that, about where the actual origin of the necklace or where it was made or things like that. So in writing about that, I just wrote about my aunt, and just how she was a very like crafty person, and she was kind of quirky in the way that she would always like thank inanimate objects. Like she was the type of person who would thank elevators for, you know, taking her up and down, and she'd make these poodles out of like pom-poms and yarn. And I can read this like really short. I mean, each story is a little paragraph excerpt, but like Auntie Kyoko thanked inanimate objects for their help and laughed easily. She sewed, made dolls and soft poodles out of pom-poms. In the hospital, when she couldn't remember anymore, she would ask for her late husband. When she passed away, I inherited some of my auntie's jewelry. I never wore this necklace, but I loved the texture, color, and weight. And so I think these stories they're again like aiming for that kind of sweet spot of not being hyper personal and overly sentimental, but kind of opening that up, maybe that brings up memories for someone else.
Yeah, what I think the work does so well is blend that personal with kind of a research-based approach. So with the box format itself, it has so many associations, kind of a keepsake box, a jewelry box, but also this kind of antique survival kit, historical significance, and then the objects themselves that you're describing, they function on two levels: your own personal stories and then material stories, researching perhaps where these materials come from, like you said, what the necklace is actually made of. And I know that research is a large part of your practice. Could you talk a little bit about what your larger research process is when you're starting a book like this?
I think I just have an obsessive personality. And so when I've somehow managed to use this to fuel work, I use it for positive things now instead of just like thinking myself into a hole.
Mhm.
But when I find something that I that's kind of piques my interest, I want to know every single thing about it. You know, there was a moment recently where I realized I don't know too much about sharks. So I think I bought like 13 books on sharks just to read about sharks. And so I like interpreting those types of like heavily researched things into I guess like a non-linear narrative, like something where I can still kind of convey that message or information without writing like a straightforward essay or book about it, because I don't process information like that very well. I think reading just a straightforward book is actually weirdly a struggle for me.
Mhm.
I do learn better visually and with more hands-on approach. And so right now I'm working on a project about microplastics. So I just kind of
Wow.
contacted some people like, hey, how many marine biologists do you know? Like, how do I get in contact with them? And just kind of
Yeah.
going from there, because I don't want to just piece together things that I find on the internet. Like, I want to get in there and I want to fully understand what.
And the format that you designed this book in, again, it requires the reader to have a certain element of this research and discovery, be willing to just experience the objects first before they're confronted with the explanatory text, which I think really fits with the way you're describing your process as well. And then your choice to actually put the objects inside these little vials or envelopes and containers is both very precious, but also kind of treats them in some way like research specimens to a sense. Yeah. And I'm a little curious if you want to expand on why you decided to put them all in vials like that rather than just in the compartments in the open or another kind of format.
I think that's just exactly why. Like it adds to the preciousness of them. The same reason, I don't know, I put my favorite jewelry in a box, like instead of just like throwing on my nightstand. Like, I don't know, it's a way of protecting it, but it's also a way of adding value to it in this way. Like, it makes you pay attention to it in a way. Like the feather, I can walk across a feather in a parking lot every day, but there's something about it wrapped in this like delicate paper and gold foil stamped, and it is just a feather, but it's I don't want to call it packaging, but
I mean, it's also a nod to the, historic significance of putting something in a book format. It sort of elevates it to a certain extent because the book has such a rich history. So when you put these objects in this book container and then further put them in these vials or these cases that are so meticulously crafted, it then elevates these materials the way you're discussing. And I want to start winding us down a little so that we can talk to the other semifinalists as well. But I really would love to hear a little bit more about the stamping, the text that you wrap them in. It's so interesting because when you first encounter these objects, I expected that would be a descriptor, a labeling of some kind, but instead it sort of refuses that again with this, if you need anything, rather than actually giving any information about what's inside.
So it is all gold foil stamped, and I did want to reuse that phrase just because you hear it a lot. When something terrible happens, you're like, if you need anything, let me know. If you need anything, let me know. There's no real, very rarely does someone outright offer you like, hey, I'll come over and cook you dinner, or like a very specific need to be met, but it's more vague, but it is sincere. It's a sincere offering with low commitment. And I think by labeling it all the same text, all this, it's all gold, the size doesn't change. It's literally the exact same stamp. So the title of the book, the title of the box, like is the exact same size as all the labels. So it's all on that same level. And I think there's something to that too. Like they're all, again, yeah, just the same.
Yeah, I love that it's like the uniformity of the labeling, size, scale, printing, but then the real difference in the kinds of objects that you've included. They all have that meaning to you, but they are very different types of objects, as we've said. And yet they can all serve this universal purpose for you as talismans, and then hopefully to evoke something in the readers who encounter them in the book. But they're all given that same kind of framing, which is really nice. I didn't think about that or realize initially that they are all printed at the same scale.
Yes. And the colors as well. It's all white, like everything is white.
Yeah.
This sort of uniformity, and it's almost kind of in a weird way asking like, oh, will this work? Like, will this work? Will this work? It's just.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like, I'll try this now. I'll try this now. Yeah, I really enjoyed spending time with your book and thinking through all these different ways that these objects could function. And in my own research, I'm really drawn to the histories that objects can tell, books, and then what's contained within them as both personal, political, and larger cultural histories of these materials and objects. So it was really great to see your work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we expand it to the other semi-finalists or finalists?
No, no, just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bewildered still, but.
No, congratulations. Well deserved. Okay. I think Elisa, you will take it from here and open it up to a larger discussion.
Yeah. Thank you. So if I can invite the finalists to join us, and Megan, you're welcome to stay on camera if you want, or you can hop off camera. It's up to you. But if everyone else could join the finalists. See cameras coming on. And while you're getting spotlit, I'm interested, and I'll toss this opening question out to each of you because I'm interested in the ways that you each are using archives in your work, whether those are personal archives or more research-based archives, or archives of language and the forms and functions of language in Savannah's work. And I'm wondering if each of you can talk a little bit about kind of how research and archives informs your artistic practice, either in the works that you submitted and were selected for this year's prize, or in your wider practice. And maybe Savannah, I'll start with you, and I'll kind of lob it to each of you for that first question.
Yeah, thank you. Congratulations, Keri. Yeah, I think for the question of archives for my book, and I think my larger practice as a book arts person and printmaker really consists less of visual indicators or signs or objects, and much more around archives around specific words. And that database of language is something that's really interesting to me, specifically looking at how histories of language around immigrant bodies has really continued to shift, specifically in the US for the last 100 years. That's something that I find not just really interesting, but is a big part of how I connect my own personal history as a second-generation American and growing up primarily around members of my family who had to learn English. So that for me is I think that personal note really, like Keri was kind of talking about, really creates like an archive that you are invested in beyond just like an academic kind of sense. And that emotion also kind of creates its own inertia to kind of push me forward to continue kind of looking at where do I see like patterns in language, or specifically with this book project, how am I looking at kind of childhood games or tongue twisters to kind of draw on and connect to this larger history of like blue collar jobs, machinery, things like that.
Thank you. Stephen, wondering if you can speak to, this combination of this very personal archive of the story with your brother, and then this kind of more universal experience of these medical archives, and how that functions in this work for you.
Well, this journal that I acquired, actually, a 19th century ledger that somebody had copiously written their notes on, was for sale in a bookstore. And so I just bought it and shelved it. I'm a collector. I've been collecting everything my whole life. And then as my brother was dying, I was collecting, and didn't include, hundreds of emails, hundreds of voice messages. 3 pounds when he passed, and he was a veteran. So the VA gave me 3 pounds of medical records. There was more information than anybody would ever want. And so I just sort of selected it. And I still collect. I ended up throwing away 3 pounds of medical records. I mean, that's stuff you just don't want to keep. I used a few pages and tossed it. It's creating archives and collecting material is just part of my work in progress.
Thank you. Erin, how about for you?
Yeah, I think looking through queer archives is a huge part of my practice, especially for the past year, because this book was a part of a larger group of work for my thesis that basically everything was inspired by things found in queer archives, and looking at that through different lenses, whether through like print or artist books. And I think it's really important because, I don't know, queer history isn't taught that much, and an archive is a great way to teach like real tactile history to people. And I think that's super important nowadays too. And I just find a lot of joy from looking through archives, and I make these books kind of to bring little things that make me happy or are just interesting and can start a conversation out of the archives, and to present them in a really like interesting way, which is artist books is the perfect vehicle for that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jacob?
Everyone's book was so inspirational, and thank you for the question. And when Keri was showing all these objects, and I was like, oh, I have all these little collections too. And and like a little leaves too, I found just from like the road. And I think one thing make book artists different like than painters, sculptors is like we intend to collect things, and the books is like a collection of stories, pages. So I think we always intend to like using these little objects that contain stories, moments, and memories, and using these objects in our works. So I think like how beautiful we are using these objects that belongs to other people and was important to other people, and we cherish them and cherish the history. So I think that makes books different too. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Keri, I know you touched on this in your conversation with Megan, but I also wanted to make sure that I could ask you kind of how archives are functioning for you, both in this book, which is really personal, and in your wider body of work.
I think the objects themselves, and just with collections, I was thinking more about it, and I guess utilizing different archives. It's when I was talking about understanding things, I also mean in terms of like having an object and then like, what does this mean? Like thinking about it in that sort of way too, like, and not just more of a historical or things that you would write on a specimen tag. I don't need to know like the weight and height and like the more technical like physicality, but just when you're kind of confronted with these things, like just investigating it in a different way of like, what does all this mean? And like, how can we also look at it or interpret these things? I'm not sure if I think I answered that. I don't know. But I guess that's how I would incorporate them into my work.
Great, thank you. And just to remind folks that you can put questions in the chat if you have things that you want to ask to our finalists. Savannah, what is your hope for people? Well, what do you hope people will experience if they read a page out loud in the gallery and choose to rip out a page, which I've seen your work now in our gallery, and I saw it at High Point when it was on display there. And the idea of like ripping a page out of a book on display in a gallery is like my heart starts racing a little bit, even though I know it's like what you're supposed to do. So what's your hope that people will experience other than like abject terror?
I think that's a really, that was an important sticking point for me in considering this project, not just in relation to, say, the different histories of language, but also how language and maybe book arts specifically live in a performative setting, usually in a gallery or museum, a space that very clearly indicates to guests or visitors this specific set of rules that manage how we interact with objects, books in general, fine art books, as objects that we want to be very cognizant of how we touch them, interact. And so I kind of wanted to include as a part of a foil to that the requirement of guests willingly choosing to put themselves out there in that performative way, which of course I think it's always important to me that guests have a choice of how they interact and the level of challenge they want to take upon themselves in any setting. And I think like part of that, giving guests that option of how they want to interact with the book and read something out loud, knowing that in a gallery setting, for example, you could be by yourself and maybe the challenge seems less, or you could be at an opening and you're surrounded by 50 people you don't know. And you're willingly kind of putting yourself out there to try pronouncing something in a language you might hear or not hear or have some familiarity with or not. But that kind of point of challenge I think was really interesting. And then kind of building up, not just in the speaking component, but then tearing a page, I think also both of those things are meant to have the viewer kind of consider what challenges English language learners or immigrants in general have realistically in some way when having to just live their lives every day, going to the grocery store, getting gas, trying to go to work, taking the bus. All of these things compound to create, just in someone's daily life, things that can be really scary and difficult. And so I've wanted really this piece to just kind of get people to think about like the few challenges they may have in reading a few sentences out loud in Spanish, and tearing a page is relatively minuscule compared to the reality of a lot of people in the US. But also to have it, I think this is, I'm sorry, I'm talking kind of a long time, but I think also that it is done in the spirit of trust, that it's not just putting someone on blast or to feel bad or insecure, that it is done in a spirit of, if you read this, if you're an English speaker and you read the Trabalenguas in Spanish out loud, you get to keep something with you that you can then continue to read and, add to your own archive in whatever way you see fit or passed along. So I think it's also
meant to be tempered in that way.
Thank you. Jacob, I'm wondering if you can talk about what connections you see between cigarettes and masculine stereotypes and how you're countering that masculinity in your book.
So my dad smokes a lot and he talks very little. So a lot of time when I look at he smokes, I just feel like, oh, perhaps I did something wrong and was not the son he was hoping for. I didn't have a good grade or things like that, etc. And also when I had several partners who smokes too, and they intend to have the moment to themselves. And shame to say, sometimes I smoke too. And when I smoke, it's more like I'm stressed about things and I really feeling it's on the top of me. And the society always say like, oh, as a man, you have to be like this tough figure for the family. You have to handle all the pressures. And I have noticed a lot of people in the city, they often take a cigarette break too. So at that moment, they actually just want to have a little break with themselves. And it's actually more than just a man or woman. And it's just media often use this as a very cool tool to make people looking very masculine, very cool, and very independent, very strong. So it's often being used. And the funny thing is, faggots, as it was used for cigarettes and both gay terms too. So I think it's just a lot of interesting turn in between of the words and texts. So I really like using words in these play titles. Yeah, hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Stephen, I'm curious, your book is so moving and so personal, and you know, books can be this way that we process things that we're going through personally and put it out in the world to share with others. And I'm curious if creating the book was a cathartic experience for you in the passing of your brother, and kind of what you hope it reveals about your relationship.
Cathartic? I guess so. It was more, it was a job. It was just something I had to get done. It's, you know, it's still pretty fresh. I mean, he died in 2015, and, you know, I work on it, put it away, work on it. You know, there's still a part, I'm still making a box for it still. And yeah, cathartic in a way that once I finished the body of it, I was able to get rid of this whole archive that I realized that there was no reason to keep anymore. It was all there in the book. And like I said, I didn't need the 3 pounds of medical records. I don't need my mother's children's book. You know, there were some pretty interesting insights to growing up as a kid in the 60s. You know, it's just, my mother wrote at one point, guns, guns, guns. Everything's about guns. You know, it was just cowboys and Indians. So getting rid of all of that is, yeah, it's cathartic, but it's, there's some stuff that I'll just keep carrying with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Erin, with your book, I'm curious how this is kind of a more technical question than some of these other questions, but how you chose the color scheme and the typefaces and how that relates to this kind of like public nature of these personal ads that are both like very personal, but it's about making this connection across space and finding other people in community from like this space of isolation. So I'm curious kind of how you landed on some of your design choices.
Yeah, definitely all the text throughout, I have like a copy of it here. All the text throughout the ads on the personal ads is the original like ad posted. I just like got the reproduction and basically converted them to black and white to print on the risograph. So all the text in there is pretty authentic to its source material. The little card I have in the back, I chose a pretty standard like typewriter font just to aesthetically match that. Yeah, and for my color scheme, I was also thinking about like the parallel of love letters, how some of these personals are kind of love letters. And I wanted to house them in kind of like a warm, like lovely, I don't know, environment. Because I felt a lot of joy for them, and some of them are sad too, but I didn't want it to be, you know, not personal, you know. I didn't want it to feel very cold and like I was just keeping these in, I don't know. I wanted it to feel very like inviting too. Yeah.
Great. This question is from Megan. She's interested in hearing how, and this is kind of a question for everyone, and I'll kind of parse it out, but interested in hearing how the other finalists consider this question of unveiling in their work, which she asked Keri about, in terms of how things are revealed in your book, Keri. And each of the works withholding a little something at first and then kind of slowly unveiling that through the opening and the reading process. And I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about that kind of pace of hiding and revealing or unveiling things over time. And Savannah, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Megan. I think that there are two main points of kind of unveiling that I was really, to use your word, really interested in for the project. One was that the covers of each of the two books have there's respective directions for the project in the opposite language than the content of the book. So the English kind of book, the directions on the cover are in English, and then you get the trabalenguas in Spanish on the inside, kind of without warning. It's just saying like you can recite this tongue twister. And so I think that's one of that there is like this again kind of a language game at play where you don't really know what you're going to get, and you kind of have to just you get to decide at that moment if you want to try it or not. So it's one. It's the opposite for the other book, which the directions are in Spanish, the content is in English. And I think the other thing is that's maybe more subtle, which is this is a tongue twister that is really common in Spanish. It's something that any Spanish speaker or anyone who's learning Spanish has encountered in some capacity. So it's really popular, and it will work to train your tongue, and you will get better at the trilled R sound if you practice it. But on the other side, for the book where it is, the directions are in Spanish and the content is in English, of course, it's translated. And so even if you are reading the same tongue twister, which is like meaningless semantically, right? It doesn't do anything, you know, that translation is kind of a foil to like the original. And I was really interested in that to see how in this unveiling, the languages, of course, are not just one-to-one. The histories of languages are not one-to-one. They are a complex set of power relations and ways of engaging that are shifted in really kind of small details through each generation. And so I think like those are all really important points in how we kind of more realistically consider language. And so that kind of thwart, I thought, was kind of a nice detail of, you know, where can we kind of make meaning, and, you know, yeah.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think unveiling was pretty important to my concept, starting with the structure that I chose. I definitely chose to have a flag book that could spread really wide. First and foremost, to like just show volume and variety right off the bat, and also to have it be able to flip through too, because I wanted to kind of simulate the same experience of, you know, me or anybody looking through an archive, and have that same experience of flipping through something and maybe there was something you didn't notice the first time. And yeah, I don't know, just to have a really similar experience to that, because that's something I enjoy and I would like to kind of condense that in this book. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something I enjoy as well. And I feel very spoiled getting to go to MCBA every day, because I know sometimes I get very overwhelmed in exhibitions, and especially in book arts exhibitions, because you want to take time with the work. And so getting to kind of revisit the pieces and take time with them over time is just such a privilege, because it does, you know, book arts does require, artist books require that you kind of sink in with the work in a different way than other types of work, where that might reveal itself more kind of more quickly or in a two-dimensional way. Jacob?
I work with the conceptual books and the materiality in bookmaking. So to me, like what makes the book is very important. How the book is structured and how reader reading the book. So for me, like I said, like each cigarette is kind of like the moment when people enjoying with themselves. And when they finish the cigarette and they twist it, finish it, and I see the cigarette become like a punctuation. It's like a period of the ending of their internal conversation. So then each cigarette contains a story. And also I collect this story and I made them into paper and made this cigarette box. So the box become a cover, and each cigarette box acting like a page, a story. So to me, I was working with how the book is structured and how the pages, covers, and thread, how it's bound together. And for the last empty cigarette box, I just used all the cigarettes and made it into the box itself. So all the pages are just last in the past, and yeah, made it into the box. So the box itself is the story, is the book itself. So for me, I was really enjoy how the layers of information, how the layers of stories was putting together. At the end, when the reader finish reading the statement, then they will understand, oh, is the book, and that is how the important of the revealing to me in my book making. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Well, I was dealing with Greg's life, so you know, it starts out in the beginning, and at the same time with his illness, on the verso is his one image locating his cancer, and that goes through the whole book on the verso page, and then starting out with birth records and childhood imagery, and ending up with some very blank pages that are just painted sort of a ghostly white, and his ashes are sealed in the end. And eventually that cancer image disappears. And then there's some movement back and forth. You're early on with the images, the text from my mother's book, it's interspersed with his cancer information. So it plays on that idea of thumbing through a book and sort of moving forward and then moving backwards.
Thank you.
And terminating.
Thank you. And I just want to say how moved I was by your book, and I'm trying to figure out for myself a project around my father's end of life illness, and it's just such a difficult thing to think about how to delve into and to encapsulate a life of a loved one in the book form, which can be so expansive, but also you know, it's a heavy thing to be contending with. So I found your book really moving.
Well, thank you. It is, but it's also, you know, it's what we live for too. I mean, we're here, we live, and then we move on to something else. You know, it's the universal story. So good luck, have fun with it. That's all I can say. I mean, it'll drive you nuts.
It has been.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Keri.
I think the act of unveiling is just something that is inherent in book art. I mean, that's what sets us apart from the sculptor painter, is that it's not, I mean, it's a time-based medium, so there's going to be a reveal, and you do get to sort of guide the reader through it. I don't know, it's much more akin to something like film, or there's a like a journey to be had rather than have it all out in the open. So I think it's just there's always going to be that sort of, some parts are hidden and then revealed, and then you know, discovery.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that sense of discovery in this medium, I know that is one of the things that drew me to it initially, and that continues to draw me to revisiting this work, is that sense of discovery that happens, and that sense of connection between makers and viewers that kind of unfolds over time, and it continues to be really exciting to me. I think we're gonna end the questions there. I could ask all of you so many more things. I wish we had all night to talk. I want to thank you all for sharing your work with us, and congratulations. And I'd love to invite everyone to turn their cameras on and join us in a toast to our finalists and our 2022 MCBA Prize winner. Again, if you are local, please come and see the work in person. The exhibition is up through October 15th, and it is so amazing to be able to see book arts in person. I think every single piece was either bigger or smaller than I expected it to be, and things have texture and you can handle some of them. And please join us if you can for the closing reception as well. So I'm gonna switch to gallery view so I can see all of your faces, and I hope to see some of these faces in person. And join me in toasting the 2022 MCBA Prize and our finalists and winners. And thank you to Megan for serving as our juror curator this year. Cheers.
Thank you.
Congrats, everyone. Congrats, Keri.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope
Everyone.
to see you soon. Take care.